Alright guys, let's talk about something fundamental. Forget the pyramids for a moment. Forget empires rising and falling. Forget the grand speeches of philosophers and the strategies of generals. Tonight, we're going deep. We're talking about the one thing that has driven history more than gold, more than God, more than glory. We're talking about the messy, complicated, terrifying, and occasionally wonderful act of sex. But we're not here for the romance. We're not here for the poetry. We're here for the consequences. We're diving into the history of humanity's most desperate invention, an invention born not of genius, but of pure, undiluted terror. The terror of disease, the terror of an unwanted pregnancy, in a world where survival was already a coin toss. This is the story of the condom. And trust me, it's a lot darker, stickier, and more bizarre than you could ever imagine. So, turn down the lights. Maybe pour yourself a drink. You're probably going to need it. Because before there was latex, before there was rubber, there was desperation. And desperation gets weird. Let's begin. Congratulations. You've just had a moment of fleeting, sweaty pleasure in the year 1550 BC. You are lying on a reed mat in a small mud brick house on the banks of the Nile. The air is thick, a heavy blanket of humidity, river silt, and the distant smell of cooking fires. Outside, the night is alive with the hum of insects and the croaking of frogs, a sound so constant it's almost silence. For a few minutes, there was escape, a brief, animalistic connection that made you forget the gnawing realities of your life, the back-breaking labor in the sun, the meager rations of bread and beer, the omnipresent gods whose moods dictated whether the river would rise and grant you life or fail and deliver starvation. But now, that pleasure has evaporated. It's gone, and in its place, a cold dread begins to seep into your bones. It starts in your gut, a quiet, icy whisper that grows louder with every passing second. What have you done? This isn't the modern world. There is no morning after pill. There is no clinic you can visit. There is no test that will give you a clear answer in 2 minutes. There is only waiting. A month of suffocating, paranoid waiting. Every morning you wake up and wonder. Every twinge in your stomach, every wave of nausea you feel after eating slightly old fish sends a jolt of pure panic through your veins. Is this it? Is this the beginning? Because a child, in this world, is not just a blessing, it is a death sentence with a 50-50 chance of being carried out. Childbirth is a lottery where the grand prize is simply surviving. The room will be filled with women from your village, chanting, praying, and offering advice that has been passed down for generations, most of which is useless. There is no sterile equipment, no pain relief, unless you count biting down on a leather strap. No understanding of infection. You will sweat and bleed on the same mat you sleep on, and you will either push a new life into the world, or you will become another ghost haunting the banks of the river. 1 in 5 women you know has died this way. Your own mother might have. Your sister, you have seen it happen. You know the vacant look in a husband's eyes after the midwife emerges from the house, shaking her head. And that's just one fear. There's another, the other consequence. The one people whisper about, the sickness that comes from the flesh. You don't understand it as a virus or a bacterium. You understand it as a curse, a divine punishment for some transgression you don't even remember committing. It starts as a sore, an itch, then it spreads, a rash that makes you feel like your skin is on fire, ulcers that weep and refuse to heal, a slow, agonizing decay that turns your body into a prison. You watch your friends and neighbors waste away from it, their vitality draining until they are nothing but hollowed out shells. And there is no cure, The priests will offer you prayers. The healers will give you foul-smelling potions made of crushed insects and dried herbs. Nothing works. It's a rot that starts in your loins and consumes you whole. So you lie there on your reed mat in the humid Egyptian night, and the weight of these two possibilities presses down on you. A new mouth to feed in a world that can barely feed the ones it has, or a slow, agonizing death from a disease with no name. The brief moment of pleasure is a distant memory now, a ghost. All that remains is the gamble, the roll of the dice, and you pray to whichever God will listen that you haven't just lost everything. You stare up at the ceiling of your simple home, a ceiling made of reeds and mud that does little to keep out the heat or the rain, and you think to yourself, there has to be a way, there must be something, anything. You can't keep living like this, caught between ecstasy and annihilation. So what do you do? Where do you turn when your own body has become your greatest enemy? You turn to the wisdom of the ancients. You turn to the experts, the healers and priests who claim to understand the secret workings of the world, and they have a solution for you. Oh yes, they have a recipe, and it starts with a trip to the riverbank. You're not looking for reeds to weave a basket. You're not looking for fish for your dinner. You're looking for something else, something left behind by one of the river's most ancient and fearsome gods. You're looking for crocodile dung. Yes, that's the answer. That's the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian contraceptive technology. You find a pile of it baking in the sun, dry and fibrous on the outside, still moist and dark within. The smell hits you first, a potent symphony of swamp, half-digested fish, and reptile musk. It's the smell of the river's gut, raw and primal. You collect it carefully, maybe in a clay pot, trying not to breathe too deeply, trying not to think too hard about what you are about to do. Back in the privacy of your home, the real work begins. The recipe, passed down on papyrus scrolls that only the priests can read, is very specific. You don't just use the dung as it is. That would be barbaric. No, you have to prepare it. You take the dung and you mix it with fermented dough, or perhaps some honey, to create a thick, gritty paste. Imagine the texture, the rough, plant-like fibers of the dung, suspended in the sticky sweetness of the honey. You work it with your fingers until it forms a disgusting, brownish, lumpy mass. This is your pessary, your magical barrier, your shield against the dual terrors of birth and decay. Now comes the part you've been dreading, the application. You have to take this concoction, this warm, fragrant ball of filth and sweetness, and insert it deep inside yourself. The feeling is indescribable. It's invasive, uncomfortable, and profoundly, deeply humiliating. The gritty texture scrapes against the most sensitive parts of your body. The smell, now trapped and warmed by your own body heat, is inescapable. You are no longer just a woman. You are a walking vessel of decomposing reptile waste. The logic, if you can call it that, is twofold. The priests tell you that the thick, dense paste will form a physical barrier, a wall that the seed of man cannot possibly penetrate, a fortress of filth, and the dung itself, they claim, is acidic. Its chemical properties, they whisper with the confidence of men who have never had to try it themselves, will create a hostile environment, an environment where life cannot begin. They make it sound so scientific, so logical. But what they don't tell you, what they don't know, is that what you've just done is issue a formal, engraved invitation to every bacterium in a 10-mile radius. You haven't created a hostile environment for conception. You have created the perfect breeding ground for infection. The alkaline nature of the dung, actually neutralizes the natural acidity of your body, making you more vulnerable, not less. The honey is pure sugar, a feast for microbes. You are not preventing life. You are cultivating it, just the wrong kind. Within a day or two, you start to feel it. A dull ache, a burning sensation, a fever that starts as a shiver and blossoms into a fire that consumes your entire body. You have traded the fear of pregnancy for the certainty of a raging infection, and once again, you are at the mercy of the healers, who will offer you more useless potions while you lie on your mat, writhing in pain, wondering if the cure was in fact far worse than the disease. You have put your faith in the wisdom of your civilization, and that wisdom told you to put crocodile shit inside your body. It didn't work. In fact, it almost killed you, and as you recover, weak and disillusioned, you realize you need a new plan. If the physical world offers only pain and filth, perhaps the answer lies somewhere else. Perhaps it's not about blocking the body. Perhaps it's about tricking the gods. So the dung was a disaster, a smelly, fever-inducing, humiliating failure. You've learned your lesson. Shoving things you find on the riverbank into your body is not a long-term strategy for survival. So you abandon the world of so-called science. You turn your back on the priests and their foul recipes. You need something more powerful, something that doesn't rely on grit and paste, but on the unseen forces that truly govern the world. You need magic. Let's leave Egypt. Let's travel across the sea and forward in time. You are now a woman in the sprawling Roman Empire, or perhaps a village in a dark, forested corner of Gaul. The gods are different. The language has changed, but the fundamental fear remains exactly the same. The terror in your gut after a night of passion is a universal constant. Here, the solutions are not found in animal waste, but in whispered incantations, in strange objects held in the dark, in the power of symbols and the blood of beasts. You seek out the old woman who lives at the edge of the village, the one people call a hedge witch, a seer, a weaver of fates. Her hut smells of wood smoke, drying herbs, and something else, something earthy and metallic. You go to her in secret, under the cover of a new moon, because what you are asking for is dangerous. It flirts with the will of the gods, and they are notoriously jealous. She listens to your fears, her eyes like dark pools of water, and she nods. She understands. She offers you a solution, not one solution, but a whole menu of desperate, surreal options. First, the amulet, power, she explains, can be worn. It can be held close to the skin. A constant, silent prayer. But what should this amulet be made of? Not simple stone or wood. It needs to have a connection to the source of the problem, life and death. So she offers you something special, a piece of a mule's uterus, dried and cured, sewn into a small leather pouch, or perhaps the liver of a cat, taken when the moon is dark, or, for a truly potent charm, the testicles of a weasel. Yes, you heard that correctly. You are to take the reproductive organs of a small furry predator and tie them to your thigh, perhaps inside your clothes. As you go about your day, the logistics alone are baffling. How does one even acquire weasel testicles? Do you have to catch the weasel first? Is there a special ritual for the removal? The old woman doesn't elaborate. She just hands you the desiccated, vaguely horrifying object and tells you that as long as you wear it, you will be barren. It's a form of sympathetic magic. You are borrowing the sterility of the mule, or channeling the fierce, non-procreative energy of the weasel. You don't question it. You just pay her the coin and tie the strange, lumpy pouch to your leg, hoping it doesn't fall out while you're at the market. But maybe an amulet isn't enough. Maybe you need something more active. So the witch offers you a ritual. It's simple, she says. After the act, you must find a place where a wolf has urinated. You are to circle that spot, and then you must urinate in the same place. You are mixing your essence with that of the wild, sterile beast. You are telling your womb, in the language of the forest, that it is not a home for new life. It is wild territory. It is wolf territory. So you find yourself sneaking out of your home at night, sniffing the ground like a dog, searching for the pungent scent of a wild animal's passing, just to perform a bizarre, lonely ritual in the dirt. Or perhaps the magic is in the mind. It's about will. She tells you that, during the act, at the moment of climax, you must hold your breath and take 7 steps backward. 7 is a magical number. Stepping backward is an act of reversal, of undoing. You are physically, symbolically, rejecting the seed. Imagine trying to explain that to your partner. It's not exactly romantic. It turns the most intimate moment of connection into a strange, clumsy, backward-walking dance. These aren't just isolated superstitions. These are the collected wisdom of writers like Pliny the Elder, men who were considered the great scientific minds of their age. They wrote these things down in encyclopedias, right alongside descriptions of botany and astronomy. To them, it wasn't madness, it was natural law. They believed that spitting into a frog's mouth 3 times could cure a toothache. They believed that an emerald could prevent an epileptic seizure. And they believed with absolute certainty that a spider wrapped in a deerskin and tied to your body before sunrise could act as a contraceptive. You try it. You try all of it. You wear the amulet, you perform the ritual, you do the backward dance, and for a month, you feel a flicker of hope. You feel like you've done something. You've taken control. You've battled the forces of nature with the even greater forces of the supernatural. But then your monthly bleeding doesn't come. And in that moment, all the magic in the world evaporates. The amulet is just a piece of dried meat. The ritual was just you making a fool of yourself in the woods. The backward dance was just a pathetic shuffle in the dark. None of it worked. It was all just theater, a performance of hope in the face of absolute powerlessness. The fear comes rushing back, colder and sharper than before, because now you know that even the secret wisdom of the earth has failed you. You are pregnant, and the gods, it seems, were not impressed by your magic weasel parts. You have been left with nothing but the terrifying biological truth. So magic failed, utterly. The amulets, the spells, the bizarre midnight rituals, they were all just whispers in the face of a biological hurricane. You're back to square one, only now you're pregnant and disillusioned. It seems the universe doesn't care about your symbolic gestures. So what's left? If science is filth and magic is a fraud, maybe the answer is engineering. Maybe it's not about potions or prayers. Maybe it's about building a better wall. Let's stay in Rome, but let's leave the witch's hut and head to a place of testosterone, sweat and blood, the gladiator barracks, or maybe the legionary camp on some cold, rainy frontier of the empire. Here, men are commodities. Their bodies are tools of the state, instruments of violence and entertainment, and the state has a vested interest in keeping those tools in working order. A soldier riddled with venereal disease can't march. A gladiator, weakened by a mysterious sickness, can't put on a good show. This is where the whispers start. The locker room legends, the stories traded between grizzled veterans and nervous new recruits. Stories about a way to indulge in the fleeting pleasures of the flesh without suffering the debilitating consequences. They don't have a name for it yet. Not really. They just call it the bladder. It's a crude idea, born of battlefield necessity and a butcher's practicality. The concept is simple. You take an organ from a slaughtered animal, a goat, a sheep, maybe a pig. You take its bladder. You carefully cut it out. A soft, pliable, and vaguely translucent sac. Then begins the long, disgusting process of cleaning it. You have to scrape away any remaining tissue, any trace of blood or fat. You wash it again and again in water, maybe in brine, trying to purge the lingering smell of the abattoir. It's a job for someone with a strong stomach and a low sense of self-worth. Once it's clean, or as clean as a piece of an animal's urinary tract can ever truly be, you have to treat it. You might rub it with oil to keep it supple. You might let it dry in the sun until it becomes a thin, almost papery material. What you're left with is a floppy, lifeless pouch, a ghost of an organ. This is your armor, your shield, your Roman-engineered solution to a timeless problem. Now, imagine trying to use it. There's no elastic ring at the base. There's no lubrication strip. There's no convenient foil packet. It's just this thing, this piece of cured viscera. You have to unroll it, or rather, unfurl it. It's clumsy. It's awkward. You probably have to tie it on, using a bit of string or a leather ribbon at the base to hold it in place. It's less of a piece of advanced technology and more of a grotesque arts and crafts project. And the feeling? Forget sensitivity. That's a luxury for a future civilization. This is about as sensitive as wrapping yourself in a leather wineskin. It's thick. It's baggy. It probably makes a crinkling sound. It's the furthest thing from an erotic accessory imaginable. It is pure, unadulterated function, or at least, that's the theory. The reality is, it's a terrible idea. Animal bladders are not exactly known for their tensile strength. They are designed to hold liquid, not to withstand friction. The chances of it tearing, of it springing a leak at the most inopportune moment are astronomically high. It's like trying to stop a flood with a paper bag. You might feel safe for a second, but you're just delaying the inevitable disaster. Then who is using this? Not the average citizen. This is a rumor, a myth circulating among men whose lives are defined by violence and who have constant, easy access to slaughtered animals. A farmer in Tuscany isn't going to kill one of his precious goats just for a night of slightly less risky pleasure. This is the domain of the legionary, who sees a goat butchered for dinner and thinks, waste not, want not. It's the domain of the gladiator, living in a world where death is always a breath away, and a little thing like a weeping sore seems like a minor inconvenience in comparison. Most historians, by the way, think this whole thing is probably just a legend. There's no real, hard archaeological evidence, no petrified goat bladders found in the ruins of Pompeii. It's just a story. But that's the point. The fact that the story even existed tells you everything you need to know. It tells you that the fear was so real, so palpable, that men were willing to imagine, and maybe even attempt, a solution this absurd. They were willing to scrape out the insides of an animal and wear them all for a sliver of a chance at controlling their own fate. The Roman bladder myth isn't a story about a successful invention. It's a story about the depth of human desperation. It's a monument to a failed idea. It proves that even in the heart of the most powerful empire the world had ever seen, an empire of aqueducts and concrete and legions that conquered continents, when it came to the most fundamental human act, they were still just fumbling in the dark. They were still just tying on pieces of dead animals with a piece of string and hoping for the best. And as the great empire began to crumble, as the barbarians stormed the gates and the aqueducts ran dry, this fragile, pathetic technology, this myth of a bladder, would be forgotten. The world was about to enter a new era, an era where the fear wasn't just of sickness or pregnancy. The fear was of God himself, and he was not a fan of contraception. The statues have crumbled. The legions are dust. The great Roman roads are overgrown with weeds. A new power has swept across Europe, a power that wields not swords and shields, but crosses and scripture. Welcome to the Middle Ages, and you can forget about your goat bladders and your weasel testicles, because now, contraception isn't just ineffective or absurd, it's a sin, a one-way ticket to eternal fiery damnation. You are huddled in a one-room wooden hut, somewhere in France or England. The floor is packed earth, cold and damp. The smoke from the central fire pit stings your eyes and coats the back of your throat with a permanent layer of soot. Your entire family, your parents, your siblings, your husband, your children, and probably a few chickens, all share this single smoky, stinking space. Privacy is a concept that hasn't been invented yet. In this world, your life is not your own. You are owned by the Lord of the manor, who owns the land you work, but even he is a servant. You are all servants to a much higher power, God, and his will is interpreted by the priest in the stone church at the center of the village. The church is the only clean, permanent, and impressive building you have ever seen. Its bell dictates your life. It tells you when to wake, when to pray, when to eat your meager meal of pottage and black bread. It is the metronome of your short, brutal existence. And the priest, a man who can read the holy book written in a language you don't understand, has made one thing terrifyingly clear. Your body is not a vessel for pleasure. It is a vessel for procreation. The purpose of the sexual act is not union, not joy, not love. Its sole, God-given purpose is to create more souls to serve the Lord. To use it for any other reason is an abomination. It is to spit in the face of God's grand design. It is to align yourself with the devil. The church fathers, men like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, have written volumes on the subject. They have debated the precise nature of the sin. Is it the act itself? Is it the intention? They have concluded with grim certainty that any attempt to spill the seed or block the passage is a mortal sin on par with murder, because what you are doing, they thunder from the pulpit, is murdering a potential life. You are killing a soul before it has a chance to be born and baptized. So the fear that once lived in your gut has now metastasized. It has become a spiritual terror. It's not just about the agony of childbirth or the rot of a nameless disease anymore. Now it's about the eternal fate of your immortal soul. Every time you lie with your husband in the scratchy straw of your shared bed, a part of you is paralyzed by this new fear. Is this act for God, or is it for you? If a flicker of pleasure passes through you, is that a sin? If you secretly pray that this time, please, not again, you won't conceive, are you damning yourself? The old ways, the pagan superstitions, are driven underground. The village crone, who once offered amulets and herbs, is now a target. She's a witch, a heretic. To seek her out is to risk being accused yourself. To be caught with a strange pouch of dried animal parts is to invite the scrutiny of the priest, the judgment of your neighbors, the possibility of being tied to a post and set on fire to cleanse your soul. So what do? You do what you're told. You obey. You have children. And you have more children. And you watch half of them die before they reach the age of 5. You give birth on the dirt floor of your hut, and you pray that you won't bleed to death. You watch your body stretch and tear, and weaken with each successive pregnancy. By the time you are 25, you have the stooped back and the aching joints of an old woman. You have given birth to 6 children and buried 3 of them in the cold earth of the churchyard. And the pleasure, the connection, it's buried under layers of fear, exhaustion, and religious guilt. The sexual act becomes a grim duty, a biological imperative shrouded in the threat of hellfire. It's something done quickly, silently, in the dark, with the hope that God is looking the other way. This period isn't a void in the history of the condom. It's a crater, a black hole created by theological doctrine for nearly 1,000 years. Progress doesn't just stop, it reverses. Knowledge is lost. Ideas are suppressed. The simple, desperate human desire to control one's own body is branded as the devil's work. The silence from this era is deafening. There are no new inventions, no clever techniques recorded in medical texts. There is only the thunder of the pulpit and the quiet, desperate prayers of millions of women begging for a reprieve that will never come. But humanity is a stubborn, resilient thing. Even in the darkest of times, even under the watchful eye of an unforgiving God, the whispers never truly die. People still find ways. They might use the oldest and least reliable method of all, coitus interruptus, the sin of Onan, a desperate gamble mentioned and condemned in the Bible itself. They might turn to herbs, to strange teas and poultices, recipes passed down in secret from mother to daughter, risking the accusation of witchcraft for a sliver of control. The desire for autonomy, for a life that is more than just a relentless cycle of breeding and burying, is too strong to be completely extinguished. It just goes deeper. It hides in the shadows, waiting for the world to change, waiting for God to blink. And as the medieval world begins to fracture, as plagues and wars and new ideas begin to shake the foundations of the old order, a new kind of terror is about to be unleashed. A terror so grotesque, so disfiguring, that it will make people forget all about the fires of hell, because this new terror brings hell directly to your flesh. For 1,000 years, the primary sexual fear was spiritual. It was the fear of a sin that would stain your soul. But souls are invisible. Hell is a future threat. As the Middle Ages bled into the Renaissance, a new fear emerged, a physical fear, a present tense terror that you could see and smell and feel, a disease so horrific it made leprosy look like a minor skin rash. It arrived like a ghost ship, a stowaway on the voyages that were meant to bring back gold and glory from the New World. It came to be known by many names: the French disease, the Neapolitan disease, the Spanish sickness. Everyone wanted to blame it on their enemies, but eventually it was given a name from a Latin poem, a name that would echo through the next 5 centuries with a unique kind of dread. This was not like the sicknesses you knew. This was a monster, a shapeshifter. The physicians called it the Great Imitator because it could mimic almost any other illness. It started innocently enough with a single painless sore, a chancre. It would appear, linger for a few weeks, and then vanish. You'd feel a wave of relief. It was nothing, a false alarm. You were lucky, but you weren't lucky. You were doomed. That was just the first act. Months later, the second act would begin. A fever, a sore throat, aches in your bones that felt like they were being ground into dust, and then the rash, a copper-colored rash that could cover your entire body, even the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. It didn't itch. It just was a silent, damning announcement of the poison that was now in your blood. And then, if you were truly unlucky, came the third act. the grand finale. This could take years, even decades, to unfold. The disease would go dormant, hiding in your body, quietly eating you from the inside out. It would attack your heart, your bones, your nervous system. It would cause soft, rubbery tumors, called gummas, to grow on your skin, in your organs, on your skull. They would break down, creating deep, oozing ulcers that could eat away your nose, your palate, leaving a gaping hole in the middle of your face. You would see these people on the street, the walking dead, their faces collapsing into a grotesque ruin, and you would cross to the other side, whispering a prayer, and it ended in madness. The disease would finally reach your brain. You would lose your memory. Your personality would warp. You would be plagued by grand delusions, by violent fits of rage, by a slow, inexorable slide into a drooling, vacant insanity. Kings and cardinals, poets and peasants, merchants and maids, it spared no one. It was the great equalizer, the democratic plague. The fear it created was absolute. It was a social atom bomb. It poisoned the most intimate of human connections, turning an act of love into a potential death sentence. Every stranger was a potential carrier. Every kiss was a gamble. Brothels became death traps. Marriages became ticking time bombs. The beautiful, sensuous world of Renaissance art and poetry was underpinned by this constant, rotting terror. And the cures were almost as horrific as the disease itself. The primary treatment was mercury. Doctors would have you ingest it, rub it on your skin as an ointment, or in the most extreme treatment, have you sit in a heated chamber and breathe in its toxic fumes. The mercury would cause you to salivate uncontrollably. Pints of drool would pour from your mouth each day. Your teeth would loosen and fall out. Your gums would rot. You would suffer tremors, kidney failure, and neurological damage. The saying went, a night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury. The goal was to poison the patient just enough to kill the disease before the poison killed the patient. It was a brutal, agonizing form of chemical warfare waged inside your own body. This is the world that was screaming for an invention. Not for pleasure, not for family planning, but for survival. The fear of God was powerful, but the fear of your nose falling off was, for many, far more immediate. The spiritual threat of hell couldn't compete with the physical reality of this new flesh-eating plague. Humanity needed a shield. It needed armor, and it was in this crucible of fear and decay that the condom, as we might begin to recognize it, was finally, desperately, born. The age of denial was over. The age of defense had begun, and it would be cobbled together from scraps of cloth, the guts of dead animals, and pure, unadulterated panic. The pox was everywhere. It seeped through the cracks of society like a foul mist, from the king's velvet bedchamber to the flea-bitten straw of the lowest brothel. It was a relentless, patient predator, and the world was its hunting ground. The mercury cures were a form of slow, agonizing suicide. The prayers were useless. The fear was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of everyday life. People were desperate. They were ready to try anything. Enter Gabriel Fallopio. You might know his name from the fallopian tubes, the delicate passages he first described in anatomical detail. He was a man of science, a pioneer of anatomy, a respected physician in Padua, Italy. This was the mid-16th century, a time when cutting up human bodies to see how they worked was still a radical, slightly heretical act. Fallopio was a man who believed in observation, in evidence, in practical solutions, and he was living in the epicenter of the syphilis epidemic. He saw the devastation firsthand. He saw the ruined faces, the wasted bodies, the creeping madness, and he decided that if you couldn't cure the disease, you had to find a way to prevent it. He sat down and wrote a treatise, De Morbo Gallico, on the French disease. In it, he laid out his observations, his theories, and most importantly, his invention. It was the first time in recorded history that a medical professional had proposed a specific physical barrier to prevent sexual disease. It was a revolutionary idea, a thunderclap in the long silence. But what was this revolutionary device? Forget foil packets and latex. Forget anything sleek, simple, or convenient. Fallopio's invention was a masterpiece of Renaissance complexity. It was, in his own words, a linen cap. Imagine the scene. You are a man in 16th century Venice, a city of canals, courtesans, and rampant disease. You have a rendezvous planned. Before you go, you must prepare your equipment. You open a small wooden box. Inside is not a condom, as you know it. It's a small, finely woven piece of linen, cut and stitched into the shape of the glands. It's not much bigger than a thimble. It only covers the very tip. But you don't just put it on. That would be reckless. First, you must medicate it. Fallopio provided a specific recipe for an astringent herbal concoction. It was a mix of herbs, salts, and other mysterious ingredients, all ground together and dissolved in water or wine. You take your little linen cap and you soak it in this solution until it is thoroughly saturated. Then you let it dry. The fabric becomes stiff, infused with the supposed medicinal properties of the herbs. It probably smells vaguely of a salad dressing. Now for the application. It's not a simple matter of rolling it on. You place the stiff little cap over the end of yourself, and then you have to tie it in place. Yes, you have to secure it with a ribbon, a delicate pink ribbon, Fallopio suggested, for a touch of elegance. So there you are, fumbling in the candlelight, trying to tie a neat little bow around the most sensitive part of your anatomy. It's a process that requires patience, dexterity, and a complete and utter lack of shame. It transforms a moment of passion into a 5-minute-long session of macrame. Does it work? Fallopio swore by it. He claimed to have tested his invention on over 1,100 men, and in his own words, not a single one of them contracted the disease, a 100% success rate. It sounds impressive, but let's be realistic. This is the 16th century. There are no double-blind clinical trials. There is no peer review. This is just one man, a very smart man, but still just one man, making a claim based on anecdotal evidence. Maybe it worked. Maybe the astringent herbs had some mild antiseptic properties. Maybe the simple act of using it made men more careful, more mindful, or maybe the sheer, unadulterated awkwardness of tying on a tiny herb-scented hat with a pink ribbon was enough to kill the mood entirely, thereby preventing the act, and thus the disease altogether. The most effective form of contraception is, after all, abstinence. And what about pregnancy? That wasn't even on Fallopio's radar. His invention was not a contraceptive. It was a disease filter, a tiny, porous piece of cloth designed to block the invisible poisons of the pox. The idea that it could stop the infinitesimally small seeds of life was not part of the equation. It was a shield, not a dam. The linen cap was a brilliant idea, trapped in a clumsy, ridiculous body. It was the right concept, but the wrong material. It was a step forward, a crucial step, but humanity was still a long way from a real solution. The world needed something better, something less like haberdashery, and more like a second skin, something that didn't require a recipe and a ribbon. The answer wasn't in the weaver's workshop. It was somewhere far more primal. It was in the slaughterhouse. It was in the guts of an animal. The linen cap was a noble failure. It was too complicated, too porous, and frankly too ridiculous to ever become a mainstream solution. The world needed something stronger, more reliable, more visceral. And so, humanity turned to the butcher. Welcome to the age of the gut, the age of the intestine, the birth of what the English would come to call the condom, and what the French would call the redingote anglaise, the English overcoat, a device made not from plants, but from animals, specifically from their insides. Let's be very clear about what we are talking about. You take a sheep or a goat, you slaughter it, you disembowel it, you pull out the long, coiled, pearlescent tube of its intestines. You are looking for a specific section, the cecum, a blind-ended pouch in the lower intestinal tract. This is your raw material. The process of turning this piece of offal into a piece of protective equipment is a journey into the heart of artisanal disgust. First, you have to clean it. You turn the gut inside out. You scrape it meticulously with a dull blade, removing the layers of mucus, fat, and whatever else lines the inside of an animal's digestive system. The smell is biblical. It's the smell of a warm carcass, of half-digested grass, of life turning into death. It's a smell that clings to your hands, to your clothes, to your soul. Once it's scraped, you soak it for hours, sometimes for days. You soak it in water, in lye, in alkaline solutions, to soften it, and to continue the cleaning process. The water turns cloudy, foul. You change it and soak it again. Then you expose it to the fumes of burning sulfur. You are fumigating it, bleaching it, trying to sterilize it with the same chemical the Romans used to purify their temples. You are waging a chemical war against the memory of the dung that once passed through this very tube. After the soaking and the fumigating, you stretch it, you work it gently until it becomes incredibly thin and pliable. Then you let it dry. What you're left with is something that looks like a long, semi-transparent, and incredibly delicate sausage casing. It's a miracle of organic engineering, a testament to the strange properties of animal tissue. Now, you have to finish it. You cut it to the appropriate length, about 7 or 8 inches. You tie off one end, and at the open end, you stitch on a ribbon, a silken ribbon, for a touch of class, just like Fallopios. This ribbon isn't just for decoration. It's functional. It's what you use to tie the device on, to hold it in place during the act. The final product is known as a skin, a sheath, an armor against Venus. It was sold discreetly by apothecaries and barbers, often kept under the counter. It was not cheap. This was a luxury item. The amount of labor involved in producing a single high-quality skin was immense. This wasn't for the common farmer or the factory worker. This was for the aristocrat, the wealthy merchant, the high-ranking army officer. This was for men who could afford to protect their health and their inheritance. Imagine being one of these men. You are in your lavishly decorated rooms in 18th century London or Paris. You unwrap your purchase from its delicate paper. The skin itself is incredibly fine, almost weightless. It might have been perfumed with flowers or oils to mask its organic origins, but you know what it is. You know where it came from. And what did it feel like? By all accounts, it was a vast improvement over the thick, clumsy rubber condoms that would come later. The animal membrane was so thin that it transmitted body heat and sensation with remarkable fidelity. It was, in a strange and slightly horrifying way, a more natural experience. You were wrapping your own flesh in the flesh of another creature. It was a primal, almost cannibalistic intimacy. This was the state of the art for over 200 years. from the 17th century well into the 19th. The gut sheath was the gold standard. It was celebrated in bawdy poems and condemned from church pulpits. It was a symbol of the libertine, the rake, the man who dared to defy both God and disease. It was a fragile, expensive, and deeply strange piece of technology. A shield made from a sheep's intestine, tied on with a silk ribbon, a flimsy barrier standing between a moment of pleasure and a lifetime of regret. It was a grotesque marvel, a product of fear and ingenuity, and for the men who could afford it, it was the only thing they had. But its strangest, most disturbing feature wasn't what it was made of. It was what you were supposed to do with it after you were done. Let's follow the life cycle of one of these devices. We need a guide, someone who was an expert, a connoisseur, a true aficionado of the intestinal sheath. We need Giacomo Casanova. The year is 1760. Casanova, the legendary Venetian adventurer, writer, and lover, is in his prime. He moves through the drawing rooms and bedrooms of Europe like a force of nature. He is a man who understands pleasure, but he also understands risk. He has seen what the pox can do. He is, by necessity, a professional in the art of prophylaxis. In his memoirs, he writes about his preservatives, his assurance caps. He doesn't treat them as a shameful secret. He treats them as an essential tool of his trade, like a fencer's foil or a card sharp's marked deck. He describes buying them, testing them, using them. He provides us with a window into the intimate and frankly bizarre reality of 18th century safe sex. Imagine Casanova preparing for an evening's conquest. He pulls out a skin. It's new, purchased from a trusted supplier who guarantees their quality. But Casanova is not a man who leaves things to chance. He must perform a quality control test. How do you test a gossamer thin piece of sheep's gut for microscopic holes? You can't just hold it up to the light. You need to be sure. So he inflates it. He puts the open end to his lips and blows gently until the sheath swells into a long, translucent balloon. He holds it, inspecting every inch of the surface, looking for the telltale hiss of escaping air. He is checking for pinholes, for weak spots, for any imperfection that could lead to disaster. It's a moment of high-stakes, low-tech engineering. It's also a profoundly ridiculous image. Europe's greatest lover, sitting in his silk dressing gown, inflating a piece of sheep's intestine like a party toy. The act itself, as we've discussed, was probably more sensitive than one might imagine. But the story doesn't end there, because this is not a disposable world. This is a world where everything is precious, where labor is intensive, and where waste is a sin. Your intestinal sheath was not a one-time use product. It was an investment. It was meant to be used again and again. So, after the encounter, the work begins. You cannot simply discard it. That would be like throwing away a silver coin. You must take your used sheath and you must clean it. You take it to the wash basin. You use a bit of soap, some water. You turn it inside out and wash it again. You are attempting to cleanse it, to purify it, to return it to a state of readiness. You are performing a small, private, and deeply unsavory laundry ritual. Once it's clean, you have to dry it. You can't just leave it in a damp lump. It will rot, so you drape it over something. Perhaps the corner of your bedpost, perhaps a small dedicated stand on your dressing table. It hangs there, limp and pale, slowly air drying in your bedroom. A small ghostly reminder of the evening's activities, a piece of your intimate life, out in the open, like a sock on a clothesline. And the next time you take the same sheath, you might inspect it again. You might give it another little puff of air to check for new holes that may have developed, and you use it again with the same partner, or perhaps with a different one. How many times could one be used? It's hard to say, until it failed, presumably, until that dreaded moment when during inflation, you heard the sad fatal hiss. This is the part that modern sensibilities find almost impossible to comprehend. The concept of reusing a condom is so alien, so deeply ingrained in us, as a violation of every principle of hygiene that it feels like a grotesque joke. But for Casanova, and for every man of his era, it was simple, economic reality. These things were expensive. They were handmade. You took care of them. Think about the risks. The washing process was unlikely to kill all bacteria. The potential for transmitting other infections, even if it successfully blocked syphilis, was enormous. And the material itself would weaken with each use, with each cycle of washing and drying. Every time you reused it, you were increasing the odds of a catastrophic failure. You were playing a game of Russian roulette with a piece of sheep's gut. This was the pinnacle of contraceptive technology for 2 centuries. An expensive, unreliable, and deeply unhygienic device that you had to inflate like a balloon and wash like a dish. It was a desperate solution for a desperate time. It offered the illusion of control, the shadow of safety, but it was a flimsy, fragile defense against a relentless enemy. It was a product born of fear, and its use was a ritual steeped in anxiety. It was better than nothing, but only just. The world was still waiting for a true revolution, a revolution that wouldn't come from an animal's gut, but from the sap of a tree in a distant tropical jungle. So you've tested your device. You've inflated it, inspected it, and declared it fit for purpose. You have tied it on with its jaunty silk ribbon. You have survived the encounter without any audible tearing sounds. Now what? Now you exist in the strange, suspended reality of the libertine, a world where pleasure and danger are locked in a permanent, intimate waltz. Who was this person, this user of the intestinal sheath? He was not your average man. He was a creature of a very specific time and place. He was the 18th century rake, the aristocrat, the Casanova, and his world was a theater of elaborate performance. Let's step into his shoes. You are a young nobleman in London. Your days are a carefully curated sequence of leisure and vice. You wake late, your head thick from the previous night's claret. Your valet dresses you in your silk waistcoat and powdered wig. You spend your afternoon at the coffee house, trading witty insults and political gossip. You might lose a small fortune at the card table, or pen a few lines of scandalous poetry about a rival's wife. Your life is a delicate balance of maintaining your reputation while secretly indulging every possible appetite. And your appetites are considerable. This is an age of public morality and private debauchery. The brothels of Covent Garden are legendary, offering a dizzying array of women for every taste and budget. There are masked balls where identities are fluid and propositions are whispered behind feathered fans. There are secret liaisons in the back seats of carriages, trysts in country inns, and affairs with bored society wives that carry the thrilling risk of a duel at dawn. In this world, your health is your currency. A ruined face, a shambling gait, the telltale signs of the pox. These are not just medical problems, they are social suicide. They mark you as careless, as foolish, as a man who has lost control. And so, your little pouch of skins, purchased discreetly from a back alley apothecary, is as essential to your evening attire as your silver snuff box and your sword. Imagine the scene. You are in a candle-lit room, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and perfume. The woman with you is a courtesan, famous for her beauty and her wit. She is as much a professional as you are a consumer. She has seen it all. When you produce your device, there is no surprise, no shame. It is simply part of the transaction. A business expense. She might even have her own, just in case you came unprepared. The ritual of applying it is a moment of strange, detached intimacy, a pause in the performance. You untie the ribbon. You unroll the delicate membrane. It's a moment of pure, cold pragmatism in the middle of a carefully constructed fantasy of passion. It's the 18th century equivalent of stopping to read the terms and conditions. And you talk about it, or rather, you write about it. The rake was often a literary figure. Men like the Earl of Rochester wrote shockingly explicit poems about their sexual exploits, and the condom makes frequent appearances. It's a recurring character in the bawdy literature of the age. It's praised for its utility and cursed for its failures. One poem laments a skin that, having been used before, tore at a crucial moment, leading to a frantic and fearful retreat. It's a source of dark humor, a symbol of the fragile barrier between a night of fun and a lifetime of mercury treatments. There's a strange duality to its existence. On one hand, it's a life-saving medical device. On the other, it's a piece of erotic paraphernalia, a toy for the jaded palate of the aristocracy. In Japan, during the same period, they were making them out of fine, soft leather, or even tortoiseshell. They weren't just for protection. They were decorated, designed for sensation, for novelty. The condom was having a strange parallel life as both a piece of armor and a luxury good. But let's be clear. This is a story about the 1%. The vast, overwhelming majority of the population has never seen, let alone used, one of these things. For the farmer in his hut, for the shopkeeper in his small apartment, for the millions of people who make up the backbone of society, this is all just a rumor, a story about the decadent, sinful lives of their so-called betters. Their world is still the world of the medieval priest. It's the world of luck, prayer, and consequences. They use withdrawal if they dare risk the sin. They use folk remedies, passed down in whispers. They have children, they bury children, and they die from diseases they don't understand. The gap between the man who can afford a sheep-gut condom and the man who cannot is the gap between a calculated risk and a blind leap into the abyss. The condom, in this era, is not a tool of public health. It's not a symbol of liberation. It is an emblem of privilege. It's a secret handshake among a small, elite club of men who have the money and the access to shield themselves from the worst consequences of their own behavior. It's a luxury good, like a fine wine or a fast horse, and like all luxuries, it serves to highlight the vast, unbridgeable chasm between the haves and the have-nots. The man who washes and reuses his intestinal sheath in his gilded London apartment is living in a completely different universe from the man who can only pray that his wife doesn't get pregnant again. The Industrial Revolution is about to change all that. The steam engine and the factory are about to democratize many things, and in a strange, roundabout way, they will eventually democratize the condom, but not yet. For now, it remains a toy for the rich, a secret for the sinful, a fragile, expensive, and deeply class-conscious piece of an animal's gut. The ritual is complete. The night is over. You are left with the grim, domestic reality of post-coital laundry. This is the part they don't write about in the romantic novels. This is the unglamorous, solitary, and slightly nauseating morning after. You have in your possession a used intestinal sheath, and you are a man of thrift. You are not about to throw this expensive piece of equipment away. So, You begin the process. You take it to the wash basin, a porcelain bowl on a wooden stand in the corner of your room. You pour in some water from the pitcher. It's cold. There is no hot tap. You add a sliver of harsh, lye-based soap. Then, you submerge the condom. The water immediately turns milky. The texture of the gut, which was so fine and almost invisible on the skin, is now something else. It's slick, slippery, a pale and lifeless thing floating in the cloudy water. You have to handle it. You have to turn it inside out. A delicate and frankly repulsive procedure. You need to make sure you wash both sides thoroughly. You are rubbing away the evidence of the most intimate act, reducing it to a simple hygienic chore. The smell is faint, but it's there. A combination of soap, sex, and something else, that faint, underlying organic note, the ghost of the slaughterhouse. You rinse it again and again, trying to get it clean, trying to restore it to a state of pristine readiness. But can something like this ever truly be clean? You're washing it in cold water, with crude soap, in a basin that you also use to wash your face. The concept of microscopic bacteria is still a century and a half in the future. You are operating on the principle of visible cleanliness. If it looks clean, it must be clean. It is a comforting and lethally incorrect assumption. Once you are satisfied with your work, you have to dry it. This is a critical step. If you store it wet, it will putrefy. It will become a small, stinking science experiment. So you need to hang it up to air dry. Where do you hang a used condom in an 18th century bedroom? There is no designated rack. There is no special appliance. You have to improvise. You might drape it over the corner of a picture frame. You might hang it from the edge of your bookshelf, next to your volumes of Voltaire and Rousseau. You might, if you are a particularly bold and shameless individual, hang it from your bedpost, a pale, drooping flag marking the territory of your conquests. It hangs there, slowly dripping. For hours. It's a piece of your private life made public, at least to anyone who enters your chambers, your valet, your maid, a visiting friend. It becomes a piece of your decor, an intimate, organic sculpture. Let's think about the sheer, unadulterated horror of this for a moment. You are not just reusing a condom. You are curating it. You are maintaining it. It is part of your household routine, like polishing your silver or sharpening your razor. It sits there, in your personal space, a constant reminder. And what if you have a collection? Casanova surely did. A man of his appetites would need a rotation. Do you have a small box for them? Are they sorted by size, by quality, by age? Do you have your favorites? The one that's perfectly seasoned, worn in, like a comfortable old pair of shoes? The thought is almost too much to bear. This entire process is a monument to a pre-industrial mindset, a world where everything is made by hand, and therefore everything has value. You don't throw things away. You repair them, you maintain them, you use them until they fall apart. It's the same logic that makes you patch your clothes or resole your boots. It's a logic of scarcity, and it is being applied to an object that to our modern minds should be the most disposable thing imaginable. This is the reality that lurks behind the powdered wigs and the witty poetry. It's a world of immense effort and questionable hygiene. Every single act of protected sex is bookended by these strange, solitary rituals, the inflation test before and the laundry session after. It's a huge amount of work. It requires planning, patience, and a very strong stomach. It's a wonder anyone bothered at all, but they did. And that tells you everything you need to know about the fear they were facing. The terror of syphilis was so profound, so all-encompassing, that men were willing to go through this entire grotesque performance for even a slim chance of protection. They were willing to wash and dry and reuse a piece of an animal's intestine over and over again, because the alternative was so much worse. The alternative was a slow, public, and agonizing decay. So they performed their chores. They hung up their skins to dry, and they hoped that the thin, fragile membrane would hold for one more night. It was a flimsy shield against a terrifying world, and it was the best they had. So, where does this leave us? We're at the dawn of the 19th century. For the wealthy, educated, and sexually active man, the situation is this. You have a device made from an animal's gut that offers a decent, but by no means perfect, protection against disease. It's expensive, it's handmade, it requires a significant amount of maintenance. It is, in every sense of the word, a luxury good. Let's call it what it is: a bet. An expensive gamble. When you purchase a skin from your apothecary, you are not purchasing certainty. You are purchasing odds. You are betting a few shillings that this particular piece of intestine, scraped and cleaned and treated by some anonymous artisan, does not have any microscopic holes in it. You are betting that the ribbon will hold. You are betting that your washing regimen is sufficient to prevent other, less dramatic, but still unpleasant. The cost alone makes it a high-stakes game. A single sheep-gut condom could cost several shillings, at a time when a skilled laborer might earn 1 or 2 shillings for a full day's work. This is not a casual purchase. It's a significant investment. For the price of a few condoms, a poor family could eat for a week. This fact alone draws a hard, bright line through society. On one side are the men who can afford to even consider this gamble. On the other side are the men who cannot. For them, sex remains what it has always been, a roll of the dice with fate, with no safety net whatsoever. And even for the wealthy, the supply is limited and the quality is inconsistent. This is not a standardized, factory-produced product. Each one is unique. Some are better than others. Some are made from finer, stronger gut. Some are stitched more carefully. You might buy a batch of a dozen and find that 3 of them are unusable, failing the inflation test right out of the box. You are at the mercy of the craftsman. There is no brand loyalty, no FDA approval. There is only the reputation of the shop you buy it from and your own hopeful quality control. Furthermore, the primary purpose is still, overwhelmingly, disease prevention, while some enlightened individuals might be using them for contraception. That is a secondary, almost accidental, benefit. The driving force in the market is fear of the pox. This means that within a marriage, for the purpose of family planning, their use is almost unheard of. It would be an insult to the wife, an implication that she is diseased. The condom lives almost exclusively in the world of extramarital, transactional, and illicit sex. It is a tool for the brothel, not the bedroom. This creates a profound social and psychological barrier. The object itself is associated with sin, with debauchery, with the darker side of human nature. It is not seen as a tool of responsible family planning or of public health. It is seen as a shield for the sinner, an accessory for the rake. This stigma, this deep-seated association with immorality, will haunt the condom for the next 200 years. It is a legacy that, in some parts of the world, it still has not managed to escape. So we are in a state of suspended animation. The technology has hit a plateau. The intestinal sheath is as good as it's going to get, using the materials at hand. It is a clever, but deeply flawed, Solution. It's too expensive for the poor and too unreliable for the rich. It's a niche product for a niche market, shrouded in stigma and dependent on a disgusting and labor-intensive production process. The world is stuck. For a true breakthrough to happen, something fundamental needs to change. Not just a better technique for cleaning gut, but a whole new material. A material that is cheap, strong, and elastic. A material that can be mass-produced, standardized, and sold to everyone, not just the wealthy elite. A material that can be made in a factory, not a slaughterhouse. The seeds of this revolution are already sprouting, not in the medical schools of Europe, but in the humid, steaming jungles of the Amazon. There, indigenous peoples have been playing with a strange, milky white sap that oozes from a tree. They call it caoutchouc, the weeping wood. They use it to make waterproof bags and bouncing balls. To the European explorers who first encounter it, it's a curiosity, a novelty. They have no idea that this strange, stretchy substance, this rubber, holds the key. They don't know it yet, but the age of the gut is about to end, washed away by a flood of cheap, reliable, and revolutionary, vulcanized rubber. The world is about to get a whole lot safer and a whole lot less interesting. The gut was a dead end, a biological cul-de-sac. It was too expensive, too fragile, too disgusting. It was a product of the old world, the world of artisans and animals. But the 19th century was not the old world. It was a world of steam and iron and fire, a world of pistons and factories and relentless, earth-shaking change. It was a world that was about to give birth to a new kind of magic, a black, smelly, and profoundly modern magic. It was the magic of rubber. But first, let's talk about the problem. The weeping wood of the Amazon had made its way to Europe and America. This strange, milky latex was a substance of incredible potential. It was waterproof. It was elastic, but it was also a mess. It was a chemical diva, a temperamental prima donna of a material. In the summer heat, it would turn into a sticky, gooey, foul-smelling tar. Your waterproof rubber shoes would literally melt on the cobblestones. In the winter cold, it would become hard, brittle, and useless, shattering like cheap glass. It was a substance of tantalizing promise and infuriating failure. For decades, inventors and entrepreneurs threw themselves at the problem, trying to tame this wild tropical sap. They all failed. Fortunes were lost. Warehouses full of rotting, stinking rubber goods drove men to bankruptcy and despair. Enter Charles Goodyear. Goodyear was not a chemist. He was not a trained scientist. He was a hardware merchant from Connecticut, a failed businessman, a relentless, obsessive, and possibly slightly insane tinker. He was, to put it mildly, a man possessed. Rubber became his obsession, his Moby Dick. He was convinced, with the faith of a religious zealot, that he could solve the problem. He could stabilize this miracle material and unlock its potential. His family starved. His children went without shoes. He was thrown into debtor's prison multiple times. He conducted his experiments in his wife's kitchen, in the prison yard, wherever he could find a fire and a flat surface. He mixed the raw rubber with everything he could think of: salt, pepper, ink, witch hazel, even soup. Nothing worked. He became a local laughingstock, a man wandering the streets in clothes made of his failed rubber experiments, a walking, melting monument to his own obsession. People called him a madman, and maybe he was, but he was a madman with a mission. And then came the miracle. The story, like all good creation myths, is probably a bit of an embellishment, but it's too good not to tell. The year is 1839. Goodyear is in a general store in Woburn, Massachusetts, demonstrating his latest concoction, a rubber treated with sulfur. He's surrounded by skeptics, as usual. In a fit of frustration, gesticulating wildly, he accidentally flings a piece of the rubber sulfur mixture onto a hot pot-bellied stove. It doesn't melt into a sticky goo. It doesn't burst into flames. It chars. It cooks like a piece of leather. It becomes tough, firm, and permanently elastic. It is, for the first time, stable. That was it. That was the accident. The Holy Grail, the secret, was not just sulfur. The secret was sulfur plus heat. He had stumbled upon the process he would later call vulcanization, named after the Roman god of fire and forge. He had cooked the devil out of the rubber. He had tamed the beast. He spent the next few years perfecting the process in secret, terrified someone would steal his discovery. He nailed his experiments to the wall of his workshop, testing them against the summer heat and the winter cold. They held. The rubber was finally miraculously stable. Charles Goodyear had done it. He had solved the puzzle. He had unlocked the future. He would, of course, die, penniless, tangled in patent disputes and legal battles, never truly reaping the financial rewards of his world-changing discovery. But that's a different story. For our story, the important thing is this. The world now had vulcanized rubber, a cheap, strong, waterproof, and permanently elastic material. A material that could be molded and stretched and mass-produced. And almost immediately, some enterprising individuals looked at this new miracle material, and they looked at the expensive, disgusting sheep gut condoms of the old world, and they had an idea, a brilliant, revolutionary, and immensely profitable idea. The age of the gut was over. The age of rubber had begun. The revolution did not begin with a whisper. It began with the clank and hiss of machinery, with the smell of sulfur and hot rubber hanging heavy in the factory air. The first rubber condoms started appearing around 1855, just a decade after Goodyear patented his process. And they were a world away from the delicate, translucent skins they were designed to replace. Imagine holding one. This is not a fine, gossamer thin membrane. This is a piece of industrial equipment. It is thick, incredibly thick, like the inner tube of a bicycle tire, sometimes up to 2 millimeters thick. It's a serious, heavy-duty piece of rubber, and it wasn't seamless. The early manufacturing process was crude. They would take a piece of raw rubber sheet, wrap it around a penis-shaped mold, a last, and then dip it in a chemical solvent to make the edges fuse together. This left a prominent, ugly seam running down the entire length of the device, a thick, raised ridge of rubber. It was the mark of the machine, a brutalist scar from its factory birth. And the color? Forget, sheer or nude. These things were the color of industry, a drab, functional gray, or a dark, almost black, rubbery brown. They looked less like an intimate accessory and more like a piece of plumbing hardware. And yes, of course they were. They were reusable. The idea of a disposable, single-use product was still a luxury of the distant future. This thick, durable rubber sheath was built to last. It was an investment, just like its gut predecessor, but a much cheaper one. After use, you were instructed to wash it, dust it with a bit of powder to keep it from sticking to itself, and store it in its own special wooden box until the next time. It was a piece of personal property, a tool to be maintained. What did it feel like? By all accounts, it was a sensory disaster. The thickness of the rubber killed almost all sensation. It was like trying to play the piano while wearing thick winter mittens. It was clumsy. It was awkward. It smelled faintly of sulfur and the factory floor. It was, in every possible way, a passion killer, a thick, rubbery wall between you and the person you were with. But it had two revolutionary, world-changing advantages over the gut sheath. First, it was strong. You didn't have to inflate it to check for holes. The chances of this thick, vulcanized rubber tearing were practically zero. For the first time, men had a truly reliable barrier. The fear of catastrophic equipment failure was largely eliminated. And second, it was cheap. It was mass-produced in factories. It wasn't a luxury item for the aristocracy anymore. It was a product for the masses. A working-class man could now afford to protect himself. The price of a single gut condom could now buy you a rubber one that would last for months, if not years. This was the great democratization. For the first time in human history, reliable protection was within the financial reach of the common man. The rubber condom was a triumph of function over form. It was ugly. It was clumsy. It was profoundly unerotic, but it was cheap. And it worked. It was the Model T Ford of condoms. It wasn't pretty, but it put the world on wheels. It took the condom out of the back alley apothecary and put it on the path to the corner drugstore. It was a revolution, a loud, smelly, and slightly uncomfortable revolution, but a revolution nonetheless. It promised a future free from the terror of the pox, a future where men could finally take control of their own health, regardless of their station in life. But just as this new technology was poised to change the world, a new kind of enemy appeared. This enemy didn't attack the body, it attacked the mind. It was a man, armed not with a sword or a gun, but with a law, and he was about to declare a holy war on the humble rubber condom. The machine was a success. The factory was churning out cheap, reliable rubber condoms. The technology was poised to liberate humanity from the age-old terror of syphilis. It should have been a story of triumph, a straightforward march of progress, but history is never that simple, because for every action, there's a reaction, and the reaction to this new era of sexual autonomy was a man named Anthony Comstock. Comstock was not a doctor. He was not a scientist. He was not a theologian. He was a dry goods salesman from New York, a devout Christian, and a man consumed by a burning, incandescent rage against what he saw as the rising tide of filth and sin in America. He was, in his own words, a weeder in God's garden, and he had identified a new and particularly insidious weed. To Comstock, the rubber condom was not a medical device. It was an instrument of the devil. It was a license for debauchery. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card for sinners. By removing the terrifying consequences of sex, disease, and pregnancy, the condom, he believed, would unleash a torrent of lust and immorality that would drown the nation in its own depravity. It would allow men to visit brothels without fear. It would allow unmarried couples to engage in sin without consequence. It would, most horrifically of all, allow married women to control their own fertility, to defy God's command to be fruitful and multiply. It was a direct assault on the natural order, on the will of God, and on the Victorian family itself. And so, Anthony Comstock launched a crusade. He was a man of prodigious energy and unshakable self-righteousness. He founded the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. He became a special agent of the United States Post Office, granting him the power to search the mail and make arrests. He was a one-man army, a moral vigilante with the full backing of the state. His crowning achievement came in 1873. He single-handedly lobbied for and pushed through Congress a piece of legislation that would come to be known simply as the Comstock Act. The official title was an act for the suppression of trade and circulation of obscene literature and articles of immoral use, and it was a weapon of mass destruction aimed directly at sexual health and freedom in America. The law was breathtakingly broad. It made it illegal to send any obscene, lewd, or lascivious material through the U.S. mail. But what did that include? It included pornography, of course, but it also explicitly included any article or instrument designed for preventing conception or producing abortion. It also banned any written information about where such articles could be obtained. Let that sink in. A doctor could no longer mail a medical textbook to a student if it contained a chapter on contraception. A married woman could not order a diaphragm from a catalog, and the rubber condom, that life-saving piece of vulcanized rubber, was now officially classified alongside pornographic postcards and dirty French novels as contraband, as filth. Comstock was relentless in his enforcement of the law. He boasted of having destroyed 160 tons of obscene literature. He claimed responsibility for the arrests of nearly 4,000 people. He bragged that his work had driven at least 15 of his victims to suicide. He was a man who measured his success in the misery of others. The effect of the Comstock Act was immediate and catastrophic. It drove the entire subject of sexual health underground. It created a climate of fear and ignorance. Doctors were afraid to discuss contraception with their patients. Pharmacists were afraid to stock condoms. A dark curtain of silence fell over the most important conversations a person could have about their own body. The law did not, of course, stop people from having sex. It did not stop the spread of syphilis. It did not stop unwanted pregnancies. All it did was make everything more dangerous. It threw people back into the darkness. It forced them to rely on back alley abortions, on quack remedies, on the same ineffective and dangerous methods that had plagued humanity for centuries. The rubber condom, the product of industrial genius, the great democratizer of safety, was now an outlaw. It was a piece of contraband, a dirty secret to be bought and sold in the shadows. Comstock's war on vice was in reality a war on public health. It was a war on science. It was a war on the simple, human desire to live a life free from preventable suffering. He saw himself as a soldier of God, weeding the garden of sin. But what he was really doing was poisoning the well. He was a man who, in his quest to save America's soul, was perfectly willing to sacrifice its body. In the shadow of his legacy, the long, cold shadow of shame and silence would stretch for nearly a century. The law was a wall, a great, unscalable wall of sanctimonious piety, built by Anthony Comstock and his army of moral crusaders. You could no longer speak the name of the thing. You could not advertise it. You could not send it through the mail. The condom had been officially banished from polite society. It had been declared obscene. But here's the thing about human ingenuity, especially when it's driven by the twin engines of profit and desire. It finds a way. The law was a wall, but a wall full of cracks, and through those cracks, a whole new language of deception and evasion began to seep. The condom did not disappear. It just went into disguise. Welcome to the golden age of the euphemism. You are a man in the 1890s. You walk into a pharmacy. You do not, under any circumstances, ask for a condom. To do so would be to invite a frosty stare from the pharmacist, a lecture on morality, and a swift ejection from the premises. You are not a sinner seeking a tool for debauchery. You are a respectable gentleman, concerned about other matters. So what do you ask for? You learn the code. You lean in. You lower your voice and you ask for rubber goods, or perhaps sporting goods. You might ask for a protector, a shield, or a sheath. You might, if you were in a particularly sophisticated establishment, ask for a gentleman's article. It was a delicate dance of deniability, a shared conspiracy of silence between the buyer and the seller. The pharmacist knew what you wanted. You knew what you wanted. But as long as the forbidden word was never spoken, the transaction could proceed under the cloak of plausible deniability. And how did the manufacturers sell their illegal product? They became masters of marketing misdirection. They couldn't advertise a product for preventing conception. That was illegal. But the Comstock Act had a loophole, a tiny but crucial crack in the wall. It was not illegal to sell a product for the prevention of disease. And so, the condom was rebranded. It was no longer a contraceptive. It was a disease prophylactic. The advertisements, tucked away in the back pages of men's magazines and sporting gazettes, were masterpieces of coded language. They would feature pictures of Roman soldiers or medieval knights in full armor. The condom was not a condom. It was the gladiator, the sentinel, or the knight's armor. It was a shield to protect you in your battles. The implication was clear. It was for men visiting brothels, for soldiers on leave, for anyone venturing into the dangerous territory of illicit sex. It was for protecting your health, not for planning your family. And for women, the hypocrisy was even more staggering. The market was flooded with products advertised under the umbrella of feminine hygiene. These were douches, suppositories, and caustic chemical solutions, all sold with the vague promise of cleanliness, freshness, and marital harmony. But everyone knew what their real purpose was. They were contraceptives, ineffective, often dangerous contraceptives, but contraceptives nonetheless. A woman could buy a bottle of Lysol disinfectant, marketed with instructions for douching, because that was just about hygiene. But she could not legally obtain a diaphragm or a condom, because that was about immorality. It was a system that punished women for seeking effective, safe control over their own bodies, while pushing them towards dangerous and often useless alternatives. The condom was forced to live a double life. In public, it wore the grim medicinal mask of a disease preventative. It was a somber, joyless product for a dirty, dangerous world. But in private, behind closed doors, everyone knew what it was really for. It was for controlling family size in an age before reliable female-led contraception. It was for allowing a husband and wife to be intimate without the constant terrifying fear of another mouth to feed, another life to lose in childbirth. The entire industry was a game of cat and mouse. Comstock and his agents would raid warehouses, seize shipments, and arrest manufacturers. And the manufacturers would change the name of their product, redesign the packaging, and find a new, even more clever euphemism. They were sold out of the back of barber shops. They were peddled by traveling salesmen alongside snake oil and miracle tonics. They were a product that existed in a legal and moral gray zone, a commodity that was both essential and officially unspeakable. This era of repression had a profound and lasting effect. It cemented the condom's reputation as something dirty, something shameful, something associated not with responsibility and health, but with sin and disease. It was a man's product for a man's problems. It was something to be used outside the marital bed, not within it. This stigma, this legacy of shame, was Comstock's true victory. He may not have been able to stop the production of the humble rubber sheath, but he succeeded in poisoning its reputation for generations to come. He forced it into the shadows, and in the shadows it would remain, waiting for a crisis so vast, so all-encompassing that the world would have no choice but to drag it back into the light. The world went mad. In the summer of 1914, the intricate, fragile piece of Europe shattered, and the continent plunged into the most savage and industrialized slaughter the world had ever seen. The Great War, a war of machine guns and artillery, and poison gas, a war that would consume an entire generation of young men. You are one of those men. You are a farm boy from Kansas, or a factory worker from Manchester, or a clerk from Paris. You are ripped from your home, put in a uniform, and shipped off to a foreign land to die in the mud. You are living in a world of unimaginable horror. You are surrounded by the constant thunder of the guns, the stench of cordite and rotting flesh, the screams of your friends. Death is your constant companion. It is random, and it is meaningless. In this world, the old rules don't apply. The moral lectures of the priests and the politicians back home sound like a sick joke. You are being asked to kill and to die for your country. The idea that you should remain chaste and pure is a laughable absurdity. You are living on the edge of oblivion, and you will take whatever fleeting moments of pleasure, of warmth, of human connection you can find. And the military leaders, the generals, and the politicians, they understand this. They are not moralists. They are pragmatists. They are men who think in terms of logistics, of manpower, of fighting strength. And they have discovered a terrible truth. There is an enemy that is more dangerous than the Germans, an enemy that is silent and invisible and can rot an army from the inside out. That enemy is venereal disease. Syphilis and gonorrhea are raging through the armies on all sides. A soldier in a hospital bed with the clap is a soldier who cannot fight. He is a drain on resources. He is a liability. During the American Civil War, for every soldier who died in combat, 2 died of disease. The generals of World War I were determined not to let that happen again. And so they made a decision, a radical, pragmatic, and deeply controversial decision. They decided to go to war against VD, and their primary weapon in this new war was the condom. For the first time in history, the condom was not a shameful, under-the-counter product. It was an official piece of military equipment. It was as essential to a soldier's kit as his rifle, his helmet, and his gas mask. The armies of Europe, the Germans, the French, the British, began distributing condoms to their troops by the millions. They issued official pamphlets with clear, scientific instructions on their use. They showed educational films in the barracks, often to the nervous laughter and catcalls of the young soldiers. The condom had been drafted into the army, but not in America. The ghost of Anthony Comstock still haunted the halls of Washington. When America entered the war in 1917, a powerful coalition of moral crusaders and religious groups demanded that the American Expeditionary Force remain pure. The Secretary of the Navy, a man named Josephus Daniels, declared that American boys would be kept clean. He believed that distributing condoms was tantamount to condoning sin. The official policy of the U.S. military was abstinence. It was a catastrophic failure. American soldiers, let loose in the cities of France and England, were not abstinent. They were young men, thousands of miles from home, staring death in the face every day. They behaved exactly as you would expect them to behave, and the rates of venereal disease skyrocketed. At one point, the American Army was losing the equivalent of an entire division of men, around 18,000 soldiers, to VD every single day. They were not being shot. They were not being gassed. They were in a hospital bed, being treated for gonorrhea and syphilis. The French Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau, was so horrified by the situation that he wrote a letter to the American High Command, begging them to reconsider their policy and offering to provide the American Army with licensed, medically inspected brothels. The offer was, of course, furiously rejected as an insult to American purity. Eventually, pragmatism had to win. The generals on the ground saw the disaster unfolding. Quietly, unofficially, they began to bend the rules. They couldn't distribute condoms as a preventative measure. That was still immoral. But they could distribute them as a treatment kit to be used after a soldier had already been exposed. It was a ridiculous semantic game, but it worked. The condoms started to flow. For millions of young men, the war was their first introduction to the condom. It was not something they had learned about from their fathers. It was something they were given by a sergeant, along with their rations and their ammunition. It was stripped of its moral stigma and presented as a simple tool for survival. You clean your rifle to keep it from jamming. You wear your helmet to keep from getting your head blown off. And you use a condom to keep from getting the pox. It was that simple. The war was a brutal, horrifying education in many things, and one of its most important and least celebrated lessons was about sexual health. It took the condom out of the shadows and put it in the hands of an entire generation. These men would survive the trenches. They would go home, and they would take this new knowledge, this new comfort with this simple piece of rubber, back with them into civilian life. The war had killed millions, but it had also, in a strange and bloody way, set the stage for a new kind of revolution, a quiet revolution in the bedrooms of the world. But first, the technology itself needed one final, brilliant refinement. The rubber condom of the First World War was a functional but flawed piece of equipment. It was still the thick, seamed, reusable rubber sheath of the 19th century. It was a product of the age of solid industrial rubber. But a new technology was bubbling up, a technology that would transform the condom from a clumsy piece of hardware into something sleek, sensitive, most importantly, disposable. The future was not solid. The future was liquid. The future was latex. The process of vulcanizing solid rubber was revolutionary, but it had its limits. It was difficult to make products that were both very thin and very strong. But in the 1920s, a new process was perfected. It involved taking the raw liquid latex from the rubber tree and mixing it with the vulcanizing chemicals while it was still in its liquid state. This created a stable liquid latex suspension that could be used for a process called dipping. The concept was simple and elegant. Instead of wrapping a solid sheet of rubber around a mold, you could now take a glass or ceramic penis-shaped mold, a former as they're known in the industry, and simply dip it into a vat of liquid latex. You would pull it out, and a thin, uniform film of latex would cling to the surface. You would let it dry, vulcanize it with heat, and then, with a little puff of air, you could roll the finished, seamless condom right off the mold. This was the breakthrough, the final, crucial leap. This new process changed everything. First, it meant that condoms could be incredibly thin. The clumsy, sensation-killing thickness of the old rubber sheaths was gone forever. The new latex condoms were just a fraction of a millimeter thick, yet they were stronger and more elastic than anything that had come before. For the first time, a condom could offer both safety and sensitivity. It was a revolution in the user experience. Second, they were seamless. The ugly, irritating seam of the old condoms was a thing of the past. The dipping process created a perfectly smooth, uniform product. It was more comfortable, more reliable, and aesthetically, a world away from its brutish predecessor. And third, and most importantly, they were ridiculously cheap to produce. The dipping process could be automated. Factories could be built with massive racks of glass formers, dipping and drying and rolling off condoms by the thousands, by the millions. The cost of a single condom plummeted. It went from being a reusable tool that you had to maintain to a single-use, disposable item. This was the birth of the modern condom, the small, rolled-up object in a foil packet that we know today is a direct descendant of this 1920s innovation. The invention of the latex dipping process was as important to the history of the condom as the invention of the microchip was to the history of the computer. It was a quantum leap. Companies like Schmid in Germany and Young's Rubber Company in America, with their iconic Trojan brand, pioneered this new technology. They built factories that could churn out condoms with a speed and efficiency that was previously unimaginable. This technological revolution happened at the perfect moment. The soldiers were coming home from the war, armed with a new, pragmatic attitude towards sexual health, and now industry could provide them with a product that was not only effective, but also cheap, comfortable, and convenient. The stage was set. The technology was in place. The audience was ready. The condom was poised to finally step out of the shadows and become a mainstream part of modern life. It had survived the moral crusades of Comstock. It had proven its worth on the battlefields of Europe. And now, thanks to the magic of liquid latex, it was ready for the bedrooms of the world. It was a sleek, seamless, and perfectly modern invention, ready to face the challenges of the 20th century. And those challenges, an economic depression, another world war, a sexual revolution, and a terrifying new plague, would be greater than anyone could possibly imagine. The party was over. The wild, debt-fueled, jazz-soaked bacchanal of the Roaring '20s came to a screeching, catastrophic halt in the autumn of 1929. The stock market crashed. The banks failed. The factories fell silent. A great, cold silence descended upon the world. The Great Depression. Suddenly, the calculus of life changed. Survival was no longer a given. It was a daily, grinding struggle. You are a man in 1932. You've lost your job at the steel mill. You've lost your savings. You stand in bread lines for a loaf of stale bread and a cup of watery soup. You see the hollow look in your children's eyes, the quiet desperation on your wife's face. The future, which once seemed so bright and full of promise, is now a terrifying empty void. In this world of scarcity and fear, another child is not a blessing. It is a disaster. It is a catastrophe you cannot afford. Another mouth to feed is a mouth that will take food from the mouths that are already there. Another pregnancy is a medical expense that could bankrupt you, a risk that could leave your existing children motherless. For the first time, for millions of ordinary people, family planning was not a matter of choice or convenience. It was a matter of sheer, brutal economic survival. And what was the most effective, most reliable, and crucially, the cheapest tool available for this desperate new reality? It was the condom. The new, seamless, latex condom, now being churned out by the millions. The timing was a grim, historical irony. Just as the world plunged into economic darkness, the technology of contraception had reached a new height of affordable perfection. A single condom cost just a few cents. It was a tiny price to pay for a peace of mind that was, in this era, utterly priceless. But the ghost of Comstock still lingered. The laws were still on the books. In many states, it was still illegal to advertise or sell contraceptives. But in the face of this overwhelming economic crisis, the old moral arguments began to seem hollow. Preachers could thunder from the pulpit about the sin of spilling the seed, but their words meant nothing to a man who couldn't feed the children he already had. And so, the condom business boomed. It was one of the few industries that thrived during the Great Depression. Companies like Trojan couldn't make them fast enough, but they still had to play the game. They couldn't sell them as contraceptives. That was still, in most places, illegal, so they continued the charade. They were sold for the prevention of disease only. Every single Trojan condom package was stamped with that phrase. It was a legal fig leaf, a wink and a nod to the old laws. But everyone knew. The pharmacists who sold them knew. The men who bought them knew. The women who anxiously waited for their husbands to come home with that little, discreetly wrapped package knew. This wasn't about disease. This was about survival. The point of sale became a strange, silent theater of hypocrisy. The condoms were not out on the shelves. They were kept behind the counter, in a drawer. You had to ask for them, and the way you asked was still coded. You'd ask for a pack of Trojans, and the pharmacist would slide the box across the counter, often in a small paper bag. No one made eye contact. No one acknowledged the true purpose of the transaction. It was a quiet conspiracy, a shared secret between millions of people, all of them just trying to get by. This was the era that truly solidified the condom's place in the American bedroom. It was no longer just a tool for the battlefield or the brothel. It became a fundamental part of married life. It was the guardian of the family budget, the silent rubber sentinel standing between a family and financial ruin. The Depression was a decade of profound hardship and misery, but it had a strange unintended consequence. It forced a conversation that America was not ready to have. It forced millions of people to confront the reality of their own fertility and to take active, practical steps to control it. It stripped the condom of its remaining stigma as a tool of the libertine and rebranded it as a tool of the responsible family man. It was the device that allowed millions of families to hold on, to survive, to make it through the darkest economic storm in modern history. It was not a symbol of sin anymore. It was a symbol of pragmatism, a small, cheap, and revolutionary piece of rubber that in its own quiet way helped hold the country together. The bombs fell. The world went to war again, an even greater and more terrible war than the last one. And once again, the condom was drafted into service. But this time, there was no debate. The disastrous moral experiment of the First World War was not repeated. The generals and the public health officials now knew the score. They knew that an army marches on its stomach, but it fights on its, well, they knew that VD was a logistical nightmare. This time, the American military went all in. The condom was official government issue. It was part of the standard kit for every GI heading overseas, and the propaganda campaign that accompanied it was a masterpiece of blunt, unapologetic pragmatism. The posters were everywhere, in the barracks, in the latrines, in the mess halls. They were not subtle. One famous poster showed a soldier with a menacing, shadowy specter of a diseased woman looming behind him. The caption read, "She may look clean," but another showed two soldiers, one healthy and strong, the other sick and in a hospital bed. The message was simple. A German bullet is cleaner than a whore. The military produced training films. They were cheesy. They were awkward. They were full of stilted acting, but their message was hammered home with the subtlety of an artillery barrage. The films had titles like "For Your Information" and "Easy to Get." They showed, in graphic detail, the horrifying consequences of syphilis and gonorrhea. They showed the chancres, the rashes, the painful treatments, and they presented the condom as the only sane, rational choice. The slogan was simple and memorable. If you can't say no, take a pro. A pro, short for prophylactic. The word condom was still a little too racy for official government use, but everyone knew what it meant. This was a generation-defining experience. For millions of young men, the US government was not just their first employer, it was their first sex educator. They learned about condoms from their drill sergeant, a man whose vocabulary was not known for its delicacy. The shame and secrecy that had surrounded the condom for half a century was blasted away by the urgent necessities of total war. It was no longer a moral issue. It was a strategic issue. It was about winning the war. And then, the war ended. The soldiers came home, and a new kind of boom began. A baby boom. The post-war years were an era of unprecedented prosperity, of suburban expansion, of a great collective sigh of relief. The nation turned inward, focusing on family, on community, on building a safe, comfortable, and predictable world. And in this new world, the condom began to seem a little old-fashioned, a little crude. It was a relic of the dirty, dangerous world they had just left behind. It was associated with the battlefield, with the brothel, with the grim necessity of disease prevention. In the clean, pastel-colored world of the suburban bedroom, it felt like an intruder. And then, in 1960, came the real revolution, the game changer, the pill. A tiny, simple, elegant tablet that a woman could take every day. It was magic. It was science. It was liberation. For the first time, contraception was separated from the sexual act itself. It was quiet. It was discreet. It was controlled entirely by the woman. The condom, almost overnight, became obsolete. It was the horse and buggy in the age of the automobile. It was a clumsy, passion-killing, rubbery inconvenience. Why would anyone use a condom when there was the pill? The sexual revolution of the 1960s was a cultural earthquake. It was about free love, about breaking down the old taboos, about a new kind of personal and sexual freedom. And this revolution was powered by the pill. The condom was left behind. Its sales plummeted. It became a symbol of the old, repressed world, the world of fear, of consequences. The new world was supposed to be free of all that. For a while, it seemed like the condom's long, strange journey was finally over. It had survived the church. It had survived the law. It had survived 2 world wars. But it seemed it could not survive peace, prosperity, and the pill. It was relegated to the bottom drawer, a relic for those who couldn't get a prescription, or for nervous teenagers on their first fumbling attempts at sex. It was a sad, undignified end for a device with such a dramatic history. It seemed destined to fade away, a forgotten hero of a bygone era. But history had one more terrible plot twist in store. A new plague was gathering on the horizon, a plague that would make syphilis look like the common cold, a plague that would not just attack the body, but would attack the very meaning of sex itself, a plague that would bring fear rushing back into the world with the force of a tidal wave. And in the face of this new, terrifying enemy, the world would once again turn in desperation to the humble, forgotten rubber sheath. The condom was about to make the most dramatic comeback in history. It started with whispers, strange stories filtering out of the gay communities in San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles. a mysterious illness, a rare form of skin cancer, Kaposi's sarcoma, that was usually only seen in elderly Mediterranean men, was suddenly appearing in young, healthy gay men. A virulent, aggressive form of pneumonia, pneumocystis carinii, was killing them. Their immune systems were, for some unknown reason, collapsing. The doctors were baffled. The media called it the gay plague. The moralists and the religious right called it God's wrath, a divine punishment for a sinful lifestyle. The fear was immediate, and it was brutal. Gay men were evicted from their apartments. They were fired from their jobs. They were abandoned by their families. They were dying, and they were dying alone in a climate of hatred and hysteria. The year is 1981. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention publishes its first official report. They don't have a name for it yet. They just describe a mysterious, deadly immune deficiency. The hunt is on for the cause. Is it a virus? Is it something in the lifestyle? Is it the poppers, the bathhouses, the culture of sexual freedom that had been so hard won in the 1970s? The community was terrified. Men were watching their friends, their lovers, their entire social circles wither and die before their eyes. They looked healthy one day, and the next they had the telltale purple lesions on their skin. They would waste away, their bodies becoming skeletal, their minds consumed by dementia. It was a horrifying, agonizing way to die, and it was spreading. It wasn't just gay men anymore. It was intravenous drug users who were sharing needles. It was Haitians. It was hemophiliacs who were receiving contaminated blood transfusions. And then, the final, terrifying confirmation. It was being transmitted to women, and from women to their newborn babies. This was not a gay plague. This was a human plague. In 1983, the virus was finally isolated. The human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, and the disease it caused was given a name that would become the most feared acronym of the late 20th century: Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, AIDS. And there was no cure. There was no vaccine. There was no treatment. A diagnosis was a death sentence. The fear that gripped the world was primal. It was a return to the Dark Ages. People were afraid to touch. They were afraid to kiss. They were afraid to kiss. They were afraid of toilet seats, of swimming pools, of mosquito bites. Misinformation and panic spread faster than the virus itself. And in the middle of this maelstrom of fear and death, a simple, old-fashioned piece of rubber suddenly looked like the most important invention in human history: the condom. It was the only thing that worked. It was the only barrier, the only shield that could stop the transmission of this deadly new virus. The same device that had been dismissed as a clumsy, passion-killing relic of a bygone era was now, literally, a matter of life and death. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, you had science, medicine, and a terrified public health establishment, all screaming from the rooftops about the life-saving necessity of the condom. On the other side, you had the unshakable forces of religious conservatism and the political right, who saw not a health crisis, but a moral one. The humble condom, that simple piece of latex, became the central battleground in the culture wars of the 1980s and 90s. Welcome to the great paradox. You are a teenager in suburban America in 1988. You are being bombarded with two completely contradictory messages, both delivered with the force of absolute certainty. In your health class at school, if you're lucky enough to have one that addresses the topic, you see the films. You see the terrifying charts showing the exponential spread of HIV. You are shown, in awkward, clinical detail, how to use a condom. The message is clear, scientific, and pragmatic. Condoms save lives. This is a matter of public health. This is about making responsible choices. Then you go home and you turn on the television, and there you see the other side. You see the First Lady, Nancy Reagan, telling you to just say no. You see televangelists with tears in their eyes, preaching from electronic pulpits, telling you that AIDS is God's punishment for homosexuality, that the only true prophylactic is abstinence, the only true morality is chastity. They tell you that handing out condoms in schools is like handing out clean needles to drug addicts. It doesn't solve the problem. They thunder, it condones the sin. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Is a condom a life-saving medical device? Or is it a ticket to hell? Is it a symbol of personal responsibility? Or is it a symbol of moral decay? The debate raged in school board meetings, in the halls of Congress, in the opinion pages of every newspaper in the country. The argument of the right was simple and powerful. They believed that the problem was not the virus. The problem was the behavior. If people would simply stop having sex outside of monogamous, heterosexual marriage, the virus would disappear. Therefore, the solution was not to make the sinful behavior safer. The solution was to stop the sinful behavior altogether. To them, the condom was a crutch for the immoral. It was a message from the government that said, "Go ahead, do what you want. We'll help you clean up the mess." This led to the rise of abstinence-only sex education. It was a curriculum based on a single, simple, and demonstrably false premise that if you simply teach teenagers to say no, they will. These programs often contained wildly inaccurate information. They would claim that condoms had high failure rates, that they were riddled with microscopic holes that the virus could slip through. They would spend hours teaching teenagers how to refuse sexual advances, and minutes, if any, on the actual mechanics of contraception or disease prevention. It was an educational philosophy based on fear, shame, and willful ignorance. And so the paradox was complete. The same government that was spending millions of dollars on public health campaigns promoting condom use to the general public was also spending millions of dollars on educational programs that told teenagers that condoms were unreliable and immoral. It was a nation at war with itself, a schizophrenic public health policy that tried to walk a tightrope between science and theology. For a young person trying to navigate the terrifying new world of sex in the age of AIDS, the message was hopelessly confused. You were being told to be responsible, but you were also being told that the primary tool of responsibility was a sin. You were being told that sex could kill you, but you were also being shamed for seeking out the one thing that could prevent it. The condom became more than just a piece of rubber. It became a political symbol. To be for condoms was to be a liberal, a secularist, a believer in science and personal freedom. To be against condoms, or at least against their widespread distribution and promotion, was to be a conservative, a person of faith, a believer in traditional family values. This simple functional object was imbued with a whole universe of political and cultural meaning. The debate was never really about the condom itself. It was about what the condom represented. It represented a world where sex was decoupled from procreation. It represented a world where individuals, not God or the state, had the final say over their own bodies and their own health. And for many people, that world was a terrifying place. But while the politicians and the preachers argued, the reality on the ground was changing. Despite the controversy, despite the stigma, condoms were everywhere. You could buy them in gas station bathrooms, from vending machines in college dorms, in every pharmacy and supermarket in the country. The sheer overwhelming force of the AIDS crisis had made them a non-negotiable part of modern life. The culture war would continue to rage, but the battle for the condom's existence was, for all intents and purposes, over. It had won, not through moral argument but through grim, biological necessity. The panic began to subside. The 1990s brought the first effective treatments for HIV, the protease inhibitors that turned a death sentence into a manageable chronic illness. The crisis was not over, but the acute, existential terror began to fade. And as the fear receded, the condom underwent its final, and perhaps strangest, transformation. It stopped being a medical device, and it became a consumer product. It became an accessory. It became part of the vast, glittering, and utterly absurd universe of modern marketing. Welcome to the shelf. Walk into any drugstore today. There, in the family planning aisle, is a wall of condoms, a dazzling, bewildering, candy-colored explosion of choice. The grim, functional, single-brand reality of the past is gone. In its place is a supermarket of sensation. The condom is no longer just a condom. It is a brand, a lifestyle, a statement. Do you want the Trojan Magnum for the man who needs to make a very specific and probably exaggerated statement about his own anatomy? Do you want the Durex Pleasure Max with its strategically placed ribs and studs, a marvel of erotic engineering designed to turn a simple piece of rubber into a carnival ride? The choices are endless. There are lubricated condoms and non-lubricated condoms. There are condoms with spermicide and condoms without. There are ultra-thin condoms for the man who wants to feel like he's wearing nothing at all. There are extra-strong condoms for the man who is apparently a sexual superhero. And then there are the flavors: strawberry, banana, chocolate, mint. You can now purchase a condom that tastes like a dessert. The journey from a sheep's intestine that smelled faintly of the slaughterhouse to a piece of latex that tastes like a fruit smoothie is a journey that spans the entire history of human civilization. It is a monument to our relentless and often ridiculous pursuit of novelty. There are glow-in-the-dark condoms for the couple who wants to turn their bedroom into a rave. There are warming condoms that create a gentle, tingling heat. There are condoms designed to look like tuxedos for a formal occasion. The marketing has become a parody of itself. The condom has been transformed from a tool of survival into a gag gift. And the advertising has changed. It's no longer the grim, terrifying posters of the war years or the coded, shame-filled ads of the Comstock era. The new ads are slick and sexy and funny. They feature attractive young couples winking at the camera. The message is no longer about fear. It's about fun. It's about empowerment. It's about taking control of your sex life and having a good time while you do it. This is in many ways the ultimate victory. The condom has been so completely normalized, so thoroughly integrated into our culture, that it can now be treated as just another product on the shelf, like toothpaste or shampoo. The shame has been replaced by choice. The silence has been replaced by a cacophony of marketing slogans. But in this triumph, has something been lost? In the rush to turn the condom into a fun, sexy, lifestyle accessory, have we forgotten its grim and serious history? Have we forgotten that this small piece of rubber is the product of centuries of fear, of disease, of desperation? Have we forgotten the millions who died because they did not have it? The wall of choice in the drugstore is a monument to our progress, but it is also a monument to our amnesia. We have become so comfortable, so safe, that we have forgotten what the world was like before, We have forgotten the terror of syphilis, the agony of illegal abortions, the cold, creeping dread of the AIDS crisis. The condom is so ubiquitous now, so ordinary, that we have forgotten that it is in fact a miracle, a cheap, simple, and profoundly effective miracle that has saved more lives than almost any other invention in human history. It is a symbol of our victory over the biological forces that have terrorized us since the dawn of time, and we have turned it into a novelty item that tastes like a banana. It is perhaps the most human thing we could have possibly done. And so, our journey ends here, in the bright, fluorescent lit aisle of a modern drugstore. We've traveled from the banks of the Nile, with its disgusting and desperate remedies. We've walked the halls of Renaissance palaces and smelled the sulfur of the first rubber factories. We've been in the trenches of World War I, and we've stood in the quiet, terrified bedrooms of the Great Depression. We've witnessed the moral crusades, the public health crises, and the quiet, personal revolutions. The condom has been a constant companion on this long, strange trip. It has been a luxury good and a military necessity. It has been a symbol of sin and a symbol of responsibility. It has been illegal, immoral, and eventually indispensable. It has been made from linen, from gut, from thick, clumsy rubber, and from fine, seamless latex. It has been washed and reused, and it has been flavored and studded. But through all of its transformations, it has remained, at its core, a very simple thing: a barrier, a shield, a thin, fragile wall against the two great, terrifying consequences of our most fundamental human act, life and death. It is a profound and deeply paradoxical object. It is a device that allows for the greatest intimacy while creating a physical separation. It is a product of our highest scientific achievements, yet it addresses our most primal animalistic urges. It is a symbol of our freedom, but it was born of our deepest fears. The story of the condom is the story of us. It's a story of our ingenuity and our ignorance, our hypocrisy and our resilience, our relentless pursuit of pleasure, and our desperate, clawing need for control in a universe that is chaotic and unforgiving. This simple, humble, and often mocked piece of rubber is a mirror, and in it, we can see the reflection of our entire, messy, beautiful, and terrified species. And now, the story is over. The lights are low. The world outside is quiet. You can feel the weight of the day begin to lift from your shoulders. All of those fears, those struggles, those ancient anxieties, they are just echoes now, whispers from a distant past. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are in a world where the greatest dangers have been tamed, where the greatest fears have been answered by simple, elegant solutions. You can let go of the long, complicated story. You can let the details fade, like words written on a misty window. All that matters now is the quiet rhythm of your own breathing, in and out, the steady, peaceful beat of your own heart. There's nothing to worry about, nothing to solve. The journey is done. All that is left to do now is rest. So close your eyes and let the silence carry you into a deep and peaceful sleep.